Welcome to Deuteronomy study number 37. We plan on finishing Deuteronomy chapter 33, beginning in verse 18 through verse 29. After we send out a hillbilly holla out to a Sister Mary Russell. Sister Mary Russell listening beginning on MeWe, one of our MeWe friends. And so we just wanted to send out a hillbilly holla out to Mary. And of course, once again, welcome all the transplanted and born hillbillies all over the country and all over the world. We've sent out hillbilly hollers out to about 30 different countries, all 50 states. Been sending them out for every study since Genesis. So with that, there is your hillbilly holla, and we'll get into prayer and then into our Bible study. Very interesting study we've got for us today, as I said, beginning with verse 18. Father, we thank you, Lord, for this time in your word. We thank you for allowing us to enjoy our relationship with you, our relationship with believers, those of us who are blessed with wives, children, our relationships with our parents and siblings, friends, neighbors, and even co-workers, especially those who are believers in Jesus Christ, of course. You blessed us with so much. We're glad to be able to smile and laugh and have a good time, even as this world just gets darker and darker by the day. May we be reminded as we study this, the last words of Moses, that our time is coming. If you're either going to rapture us or we're going to die and be present with the Lord either way. So help us to be thus minded with our thoughts on you and eternity, even as we study with your help, by your Spirit, and in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're closing out our study of chapter 33 and what are considered to be the last words of Moses. Moses has been prophesying over the tribes of Israel, and when all is said and done, he'll speak to 11 tribes, but he'll split Joseph and speak to Ephraim and Manasseh. So there's 12, but it is minus Simeon. And we're going to discuss that, Lord willing, when we come down to the end of the study. I want to get through the text first. But Moses splits Joseph into two prophecies over his sons Manasseh and Ephraim, or Ephraim, as some say it. My wife pronounces it that way. And I'm not laughing because it's wrong or anything. It's just I've heard of a lot of people pronouncing it that way. But we'll revisit this thing with Manasseh and Ephraim, or Ephraim, and Simeon when we close. But let's pick up now with the prophecy of Moses over the tribes of Zebulun and Issachar. Verse 18 says, "And of Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in thy going out, and Issachar in thy tents." Now historically, Zebulun and Issachar would be geographical neighbors in the land of Israel. By the way, it's a good thing to memorize the names of the tribes of Israel. My wife and I have that as part of our memory work. For years I knew them, but as I've gotten older, I've forgotten more than I've learned, I think. And I'd always get hung up on this or that, and so I won't do it here. It takes up a little time, but my wife and I go over those once a week. We repeat them to each other after we spent some time working on them to make sure we had them memorized. And we've got them broken down by the sons of Leah, the sons of Rachel, the sons of Bilhah, and the sons of Zipporah. And you can memorize them in birth order or in order as to what their mothers were, or there's other lists that have them in different orders. It doesn't matter. Just it's good to familiarize yourself with them. As we come to chapters like this, it helps you grasp what you're reading. And these tribes, verse 19, Zebulun and Issachar, says, they shall call the people unto the mountain. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hid in the sand. Now, Zebulun would end up next to the Mediterranean Sea. And by the way, Zebulun and Issachar are the sons of Leah, and two of her sons, and they were right next to each other, but Zebulun would be next to the sea, and then Issachar would be landlocked right next to Zebulun. Look that up on a map of the inheritance of Israel in your Ruckman Reference Bible. Is the best map I've found. But they, Zebulun, the tribe of Zebulun, would venture into the sea, and they'd become involved in trade, and they'd become very prosperous, while Issachar, landlocked as they were, would also, though, play an integral part in that trade and in the transportation of goods and the sale of goods and everything else as a result of Zebulun's sea trading expeditions. The verse also says, they shall call the people unto the mountain, they shall call the people, there they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness. And Matthew Henry says, quote, Zebulun shall improve his acquaintance and commerce with the neighboring nations, to whom he goes out, for this noble purpose, to propagate religion among them, and to invite them into the service of the God of Israel. And that's interesting, end quote, by the way. They went out, and as they went out, they preached the truth of Jehovah God and invited them to come to the temple. Now, they'd have to come and stay in the outer court, but they could observe everything, and then they could, if they wanted to, become proselytes, be circumcised, actually come in to be a part of Israel. The women could marry into the men and so forth, but we'll talk about that some other time. We have talked about in the past, but as we mentioned, this would all be a part of, or a result of, their trade adventures and their business dealings. And that's how most of us minister. Now, I'm full-time ministry, but there's been years in the past where I was, well, before I went into the ministry as a young man, I worked a secular job and then was involved in church ministry. And on the job, wherever it took me, I could witness. I went into West Virginia and Kentucky and places like that, and I could witness. And wherever your job takes you, you can be a witness, just like Zebulun was as a result of their trade ventures. And as he says here, Moses says, for they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hid in the sand. Now, I mean, that in ancient times, there's some application to that, but here in recent times, we'll come back to this when we talk about Asher, who was also along the sea north of Zebulun. We'll come back to that in just a minute. So Moses speaks of the tribe next, the tribe of Gad, in verse 20. And of Gad he said, blessed be he that enlargeth Gad. He dwelleth as a lion and teareth the arm with the crown of the head. Now, Gad's inheritance would be east of Jordan. You remember Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh would be east of Jordan. And, well, because of where they were, they would constantly face the Syrians and the Ammonites and the Moabites and anyone who comes from the east. Later it would include Babylon, and then Persia, and anyone who came from the east would come right into Gad. And so that's why it speaks this way of the being a lion and teareth the arm with the crown of the head. That's the imagery there. So verse 21 goes on to say, and he provided the first part for himself, because there in a portion of the lawgiver was he seated. When they came toward the Jordan River to cross into the land, Gad said, hey, wait a minute, look at this land right here. And so the lawgiver gave him that portion, that's Moses, with the condition that they would have to go in and help clear the land for the other tribes. And so it says, verse 21, and he came with the heads of the people. He came across the Jordan. He executed the justice of the Lord and his judgments with Israel. And so that's what happened when Gad and Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh, which Manasseh's a fourth of Joseph. And it's not all that difficult. If you take Manasseh and Ephraim, you have two halves of each. Well, both halves of Ephraim went across the Jordan, and half the tribe of Manasseh went across the Jordan. That left 1/4 of Joseph on the east side of Jordan. And like I said, the maps make a big difference in being able to wrap your brain around all this. But it's important, just like learning the names of the tribes, but getting familiar with, or at least having handy, a map that shows you the inheritance of the children of Israel. As we next, Lord willing, and we're still here, we're going to go into the book of Joshua, where that inheritance will actually be given and actually fought for and won, and then designated for each of the tribes. And the men of Gad, our text says, came with the heads of the people. He executed the justice of the Lord and his judgments with Israel. They crossed Jordan, helped the other 9 3/4 tribes drive out the Canaanites, and settled the promised land west of the Jordan River. And that brings us to the prophecy in verse 22 now of Dan. It says, and of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. And it seems like a very limited and specific prophecy about Dan. And we talked about in Genesis how Dan is the throne from the horse in Jacob's prophecy. And then we come in the book of Revelation, and Revelation 7 lists the tribes of Israel during the tribulation, and Dan's not mentioned. We talk about Simeon not being mentioned by Moses. Here in Revelation 7, Dan's the one not mentioned. And we discussed the possibility that the Antichrist will be from the tribe of Dan. It's very educated guesswork. It's not, we can't be dogmatic about that, but that would fit. So the reference here to Dan being a lion's whelp, he shall leap from Bashan, is believed to refer to the presence of lions in Bashan. Scholars, so-called, and other skeptics used to scoff at the biblical references to lions. And when the man of God was torn to pieces by a lion and that kind of thing, like, they didn't have lions in Israel. Those lions were only in Africa. Well, we know now that that is hogwash. There were lions in Israel, which, by the way, is right next door to Egypt, which is part of Africa. So it's not that big of a stretch anyway. But there was lions in Bashan, where the people of Laish were at the foot of the mountain of Bashan, and Dan ascended up Bashan and came down on Laish, ascending the mountain and defeating the people, descending, I should say, and defeating the people of Laish in the course of their settlement of the Promised Land. So that prophecy is limited as it is. We see it in history playing out. And so verse 23, we come to the prophecy of Naphtali. Verse 23, and of Naphtali he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full with the blessing of the Lord, possess thou the west and the south. Now, this means from where Dan is, if you go south and west, you'll see that's where Naphtali is. And it's south of Dan and west of the border of Dan on the Jordan River. And that's where you'll find Naphtali settled. And that's all there is to that. So now the final Mosaic prophecy is over the tribe of Asher, which it's just interesting. You find out things. I was somewhat of a Kiss fan before I got saved. And then Ace Frehley, guitarist, went solo. And I don't know why I liked his stuff. Now I look and I'm not into that. But Ace, I found out, was short for Acer, which is Asher. It's the same thing, and you'll see that in the New Testament. You say, well, that's terrible, using a rock group to discuss the Bible. Listen, anything you have in your past, as long as it's not wicked on the face of it. Ace Frehley is a real person. That's, I believe, his real name. And anything you can use to kind of help you, they call that name association type of thing to remember things, use it. And so that's what helped me remember Asher as one of the tribes of Israel, at least originally when I was younger and first trying to memorize these things. And so it says there in verse 24, and of Asher he said, let Asher be blessed with children, let him be acceptable to his brethren, and listen to this, let him dip his foot in oil. Now, I made reference or hinted at this when we were talking about Zebulun, but Asher was prosperous and he grew greatly in population. You read some of the figures of how many people there were and how many fighting men went out and fought when Israel under David went out and fought, and then later after the split kingdom and all that. Asher was one, and Manasseh and Ephraim, they grew greatly in population. And Asher, for the most part, remained in good graces with the other tribes. But the most amazing part of this prophecy is in those words, let him dip his foot in oil. Now, again, first of all, it's a fact that the territory of Asher became known for its olive trees and olive oil. And that's no small thing. And if you study ancient history, and you'll find out olive oil was like gold. And it became a major source of income for Asher and a great blessing to the whole nation of Israel, and a major export to surrounding nations. And of course that also gave Asher the opportunity to do as Zebulun and tell others about Jehovah God and everything. But more recently, here in the last few years, I think it goes back a few decades when they first started making these discoveries, but in recent times, they found large basins of natural gas and crude oil. Guess where? Right off the coast of ancient Asher's borders in the Mediterranean Sea, up where Asher and Zebulun were, and how they bordered the Mediterranean Sea. That's just amazing stuff. There's a lot more you can find out about that if you do your own studies there. Verse 25 goes on to say about Asher, thy shoes shall be iron and brass, and as thy days, so shall thy strength be. Guess what was discovered under the shoes of Asher? Under their feet? Iron and copper. And it says brass here. Why? What's brass? Brass is an alloy or a mixture of copper and zinc. I think it's something like 80-20 or something like that. It might be different than that. I'm not a chemist, but I am interested in chemistry, and I saw something recently about that. But there you go. Just as Moses prophesied. He also said, and as thy days, so shall thy strength be. Well, this is considered to have been a prophecy about the strength of Asher right up to the time of the captivity of Israel by Assyria, which we already discussed, their numbers and strength and wealth and so forth. And so that then brings us, that's the end of his prophecies. Now we come to the closing words or last words of Moses before his death. Verse 26, this is Moses speaking. There is none like unto the God of Jeshurun, who rideth upon the heaven with thy help, in thy help, and in his excellency, and in his excellency on the sky. So Moses is praising the Lord. Jeshurun is a poetic name for Israel when they followed after the Lord as the dear upright people. That's what Jeshurun means. And it's an interesting study to just run the references about God flying. You'll want to look up God flying on the back of a cherub. Of course, he ascended to heaven in Acts chapter 1. He's going to return. Revelation 19 and Matthew 24 and Zechariah 12 through 14. He's going to then land on the Mount of Olives. In Acts 1, he ascended up from the Mount of Olives, and then when he returns, he will descend to the Mount of Olives. And there are other examples. It's a fascinating study, as I said. Verse 27, the eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms, and he shall thrust out the enemy from before thee, and they shall destroy them. And of course, he did so again when Jeshurun was the dear upright people following the Lord, and he will again at his second coming, when, as Moses continues, verse 28, Israel then shall dwell in safety alone. The fountain of Jacob shall be upon a land of corn and wine. Also his heavens shall drop down dew. And when Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom, the kingdom of Messiah, what are we told about that in verse 29? Happy art thou, O Israel. Who is like unto thee, O people saved by the Lord, the shield of thy help? And who is the sword of thy excellency? And thine enemies shall be found liars unto thee, and thou shalt tread upon their high places. Man, oh man, every Jew-hating, anti-Israel devil had better face up to that prophecy before it's too late. And we've said plenty about that. But we have about 5 minutes left or less. I want to close by returning to the question, why wasn't Simeon mentioned here in this chapter of prophecies over the tribes of Israel? And I'll start by first saying, let's remember the prophecy of Jacob that we covered in our Genesis studies. In Genesis 49, 5 and 7, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly, mine honor. Be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So you look at that, it says, be not thou united. Simeon seems to have been severed, at least temporarily, from the other tribes in this prophecy of Moses. And he says, I'll divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel. And the result would be that after Moses dies and Joshua leads the children of Israel into the land, Simon ends up scattered among Judah and doesn't get really a whole segment of land except to the south of Judah, an area that was really mostly desert. And so it's just an interesting thing. We'll come to Joshua 19:1, and the second lot came forth to Simeon, even for the tribe of the children of Simeon according to their families, and their inheritance was within the inheritance of the children of Judah. That's what it says right there. In verse 9 in Joshua 19, out of the portion of the children of Judah was the inheritance of the children of Simeon. For the part of the children of Judah was too much for them. Therefore the children of Simeon had their inheritance within the inheritance of them, Judah. And then 500 years later, after this event in Joshua, we see that under King Asa, after the northern tribe has been separated from the south, 2 Chronicles 15:9, and he gathered all Judah and Benjamin and the strangers with them out of Ephraim and Manasseh and out of Simeon. There it is. For they fell to him out of Israel in abundance when they saw that the Lord his God was with him. So the three groups here, Joseph, which is split into Manasseh and Ephraim, and then Simeon, who isn't mentioned at all by Moses, here they are all mentioned as joining with Judah and Benjamin, along with the Levites, in the southern kingdom under Asa. So heading into the final 200 years before the Assyrian captivity of the northern kingdom, here the southern kingdom had those tribes, Judah, Benjamin, Levi, along with Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon that we've been discussing in our look at this chapter. The sons of Joseph, which were Manasseh and Ephraim, were given a tribal inheritance each. And then also the tribe of Simeon. They line up with God-fearing King Asa in Judah. It's just very interesting. And then again, when the great King Josiah comes to power in Judah, the southern kingdom, nearly a century after the northern kingdom had fallen to Assyria, after they're gone and there's just the southern kingdom, we see that Josiah sweeps Israel clean of all the idolatry, Baal worship. And the biblical text tells us in 2 Chronicles 34, 6 and 7, and so did he, Josiah, in the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon, even unto Naphtali, with their mattocks round about. And when he had broken down the altars and the groves, and had beaten the graven images into powder, and cut down all the idols throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem. So in these final words of Moses, here in Deuteronomy 33, we see the beginning of a connection between Manasseh, Ephraim, the sons of Joseph, and the unmentioned tribe of Simeon. That's something to keep your eye on as you study Old Testament history for yourself. So with that, we're going to close this study, and next time we'll cover the final chapter of Deuteronomy, which is only 12 verses, but include the solemn moment of the death and burial of Moses, and we will discuss the life of Moses since his death, including his future.